Whenever we're in public, we feel like there's a camera on us. We can be self-conscious, anxious, social pressure. We do something stupid, we feel embarrassed, whatever. But at some point I just realized, like, one, no one cares and no one's paying attention to me. Even if someone does see me do something that I think is embarrassing, they won't remember it in about 2 seconds and they'll move on with their lives and we'll never see each other again. And three, oh yeah, like, I don't care.
Hello and welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show podcast. This week's episode, I'm joined by Cory Allen. Cory is the host of the Astral Hustle podcast, and he's also one of the authors of my favorite book, Now is the Way. Cory dives into a whole heap of conversation, everything from mindfulness, obviously, to stillness, to breaking bad habits, to the importance of the mind leap.
Hello, my friends. This is Cory Allen, and you are listening to the Vinny Brusco Show.
And here we go.
I read your book, I don't know how long ago, but it came across at like that perfect serendipitous time of life. And it just stood out because it is a very unconventional but practical way of mindfulness. So to you, what is your definition of mindfulness?
My definition of mindfulness is, I would say in short, it's paying attention to what you're experiencing as you're experiencing it so that you can then make more self-aware choices about what you're doing, what you're saying, and also how you are responding to the arising thoughts and conditioned reactions that are coming up in your mind as you experience life.
What was your journey to mindfulness? What brought you onto that path towards practicing mindfulness and diving into this transcendental this transformational state?
It was really just because of my background. I mean, whenever I was growing up, because of the environment I was in, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and a lot of issues being able to trust reality in certain ways. And so to find my way out of those types of suffering and that feeling, I really rather randomly stumbled upon Western philosophy at first. And then from there, that led me to Eastern philosophy. And that was essentially how I discovered mindfulness and meditation. And, being a teenager and also it being in the 90s, there was no Google or YouTube or anything like that. It was all just figure it out on your own as you go, and I had no real concept of these things, except for whenever I began to read about them, some certain Western philosophical points of view and some various points of view and wisdom traditions. I began to just use my mind as a laboratory in a sense. As I was able to finally calm down my body and my nervous system just through reading, not even through techniques, but just about the general ideas of how to begin doing some type of relaxing breathing, my body started to relax a bit. And that helped me stop clenching and being stuck in that fight or flight state of mind all the time. And by doing that more and more, I just started playing these games with myself and watching my mind. And one of the games I would play with myself whenever I was a teenager is I would lay in bed and I would exhale and I would relax all of the muscles in my body as much as I could on an exhale. Then I would exhale again and relax them even more. And I would make it a game to see how relaxed can I get every muscle in my entire body. And I would start scanning my body just mentally from head to toe, searching for any place I was holding tension. And I would release that more until I would feel like I was floating And whenever I got to that state, I then had this moment of becoming aware of the witness mind for the first time. I began seeing my thoughts from behind where the stage of the mind is. So I began to recognize them as mental formations as opposed to being drawn into the theatrics in the actual actor part of the thinking mind. I began observing the mind from behind it. And that was a real big breakthrough because that was the first introduction of spaciousness into my awareness. I began to realize that there was space between my observing self and the actual, contents of my consciousness. And that then led me, this is interesting because I was reading about this stuff and I was just intuitively following all of these classical Buddhist steps where I wasn't really explicitly aware that there was a path, but just they made sense to go from, okay, you're relaxing the body. Oh, wait a second. There are thoughts and there are contents. Now we should try and, because the mental formations are so conceptual and abstract, I should start trying to label them, to apply context onto them so I can understand them more clearly. And I started doing that with my feelings and emotions and my body states and my mind states. And from there, I just started using contrast because I realized that the anxiety and the tension and the fear and the muddy thinking and the false mental narratives and all that stuff started changing. And so then I just started watching my mind all the time and studying all this stuff. And again, that's what is, traditionally, that's what the Buddha did, was he just sat down and watched his mind. And of course, I'm not making equivalency there. I'm just saying it was another step of saying like, oh, that's, again, intuitively, that's what I started doing. And then started using contrast. This is where my kind of Western, really strategic and methodical type of personality came in, as I just started going, okay, 1 week ago, I felt this way, and now I'm beginning to feel a little bit different. And now 3 months later, I remember feeling this way. Now I'm feeling different in these X, Y, and Z ways. And I would just chase down each of these in motion transformations and continue intuitively pushing in certain directions to get those to change. And that really hasn't stopped until now.
So you're a teenager. Are you having these conversations with your friends? Are you discussing these things? Are you talking to anybody about this, or is this all something that you're kind of going through alone?
Yeah, this is all top secret. I mean, like,
this is covert operations.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, no one, like in the 90s, like especially the mid 90s, like no one talked about this stuff. No one knew about it. It was just like, and there were no real resources. I mean, there were like cassettes that you could get that had some Alan Watts lectures or something, or so you could find like a Terrence McKenna book or a Robert Anton Wilson book or something that kind of got into the cross section of, wisdom traditions and like hippie thinking and some sort of postmodern philosophy thrown into it. But yeah, there was none of my friends were into it. No one I knew was into it. It was all really by accident, man.
What I find particular unique in this case, and in a lot of cases of people kind of transcending, if you want to call it, or climbing up the hierarchy of needs, is this sense of serendipities, right? So you're saying I was kind of stumbling into this world, but all of a sudden the world starts to confirm what you're feeling, what you're thinking, right? Like you start to all of a sudden see these things, and then you read about them. You're like, oh, these thoughts, these feelings, this practice is as old as time. Like this dates back way before I could even imagine, right? It goes back to, Greece, and it goes back to all these old traditional mindsets and thinking. And you all of a sudden you're like, okay, so this has been a problem, or this has been a process for man throughout time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about it, is it's just, as natural and normal as it seems to look at the stars in the middle of the forest at night, where you're just laying there, that feels right. It feels right to look at a mountain. It feels right to swim in the ocean. It feels right to sit around a campfire and talk to people. It feels right to stand in the grass with your shoes off. It's because those things are all what our ancestors did. Those are all, 200,000-year-old things that are instilled in us as human beings. And the same goes for this seeking of a deeper understanding of the inner landscape of self. We've always sought to some degree or to another to understand ourselves more deeply. Like looking at the stars at nighttime is, in a sense, a way of looking at ourselves. It's just looking in the other direction. We look in the other direction, we look inward just as deeply to understand what this means to be a human being and on this planet, And so I think that's why they feel all these traditions have been around forever, for at least 2,000 to 2,500 years in an actual, systematic form. There are various systematic forms. And so, yeah, they feel right, man. It's like, it's just a part of who we are.
Yeah, that search for a deeper understanding of the self, or I think it's a search to be complete, right? I think our minds are constantly seeking this sense of fulfilledness, which in theory or in turn of that is being complete. And whether that be, just having a harmonious internal system, or your body, and kind of bringing all those pieces together and allowing your body, your mind, and your spirit to all kind of work in conjunction with each other and feed off each other. And that's the search that I think begins the journey, right? And then it just goes deeper and deeper. And as you start to look up at the stars, you start to have those moments where you realize that you aren't your thoughts, but those are just programming, whether it be socially, family, whatever it is. Those are just programmings coming through. And you realize that, like you said earlier, you're behind the scenes observing this. It's very empowering, but it's also going to be, obviously very scary at the same time.
It can, yeah, it could be. I know, like, that's one of the things that for people who first begin to enter this area without much training, or people who are just looking to begin, and of course don't have any training because they're just beginners. One of the things that typically happens, in my experience of just having thousands of people message me this over the years, is that people have a conditioned predisposition to assuming that increasing their self-awareness and becoming more connected to the present moment, internally and externally, should look and feel a certain way. That is because what we're talking about is really rather hard to pin down, because it's stuff of the mind. It's not solid. You can't knock on it. You can't show someone a diagram. It's sort of like if you take acid and you tell someone else, like, let me tell you all what it was like. And okay, cool. Like, they have an idea what it's like, and they can read as much about it as they want, but not until they actually do it are they going to know what the experience is like. And I think that beginning to get more in touch with your own inner landscape is the same way. So one of the things that typically happens is someone takes some very basic instructions, something like sit, close your eyes, and take calm breaths for 5 minutes. And then they see their thoughts and they go, oh my God, this is a nightmare in there. Like, it's just chaos, And then they'll say, typically, well, I must be doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I must be not the type of person that can meditate, or something like that. I'm too crazy. I'm not wired the right way. I just can't do this. And that's, part of it's a whole other discussion, but part of our performance-based culture of you must be performing and optimizing and producing and doing things correctly at all times, or else you're a failure as a human.
Right.
And so people have that mindset and they think, oh, I didn't get it right on the first try. I'm inherently damaged, and so
Right.
I'll move on. But really the tragedy of that is that moment is the biggest breakthrough probably that they'll ever make. Is that's the moment where they became aware of their thoughts. That's huge. It's like you live 20, 30, 40, 50 years without ever really having that floodlight view of the stage of your mind. You finally get it. That's amazing. That's so amazing. So it's essentially like, well, of course you open the door to the garden of the self, but you haven't tended that garden for 30 years. So of course it's overgrown. Now the work is just tending that garden, and that's the thoughts and the reactions and all that stuff.
Yeah, that awareness part is like you said, opening the doorway, right? And then it boils down to accountability, and discipline, and ultimately it leads to your freedom, right? It leads to whatever your version of freedom is. That is the journey or the potential steps to take towards that freedom. And you mentioned the idea of, I can't meditate, and you hear that all the time. Oh, I can't. I'm not a meditator. No, I can't do that. And you're right. It doesn't necessarily have to look or feel like anything by any guidelines. It just needs to feel and look right to you. And it's like anything. Like I remember early in quarantine, I started doing yoga at 4 a.m, and the girl's a perfect L and my legs are shaking and I'm like, oh, I can't do this. And I hear the narrative like, what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself. And meanwhile, I'm in my living room, my family's asleep, and I'm having this internal dialogue with myself that I'm not doing this correctly. Therefore, I'm a failure and I'm embarrassing myself. And I literally stopped myself mid-thought and be like, first off, who am I embarrassing myself in front of? There's nobody up. And secondly, who's even talking? Like you're talking to yourself in this very, prolific, odd, counterbalance. But then once you can kind of strangle that voice down or suppress that voice, and you could see through that a little bit, and you could see that for what it is, then you're really kind of turning the page a little bit. And now you're playing the game a little bit.
Yeah. And also, to me, it just becomes hilarious. Maybe I'm just old. Maybe right. I'm just old now, but like the idea of you're reminding yourself you're in your living room, who are you afraid of being embarrassed in front of? It's like, one, it's your family, and two, they're not even around.
Right. They're all sleeping.
But like, why wouldn't a person feel like that everywhere? That's something that at some point it just dawned on me to where I just stopped caring and just let go of the idea of, whenever we're in public, we kind of feel like there's a camera on us a little bit. Like we can be self-conscious, can feel anxious, social pressure. We do something stupid, we feel, embarrassed, whatever. But for me anyway, at some point I just realized, like, one, no one cares and no one's paying attention to me. Even if someone does see me do something that I think is embarrassing, they won't remember it in about 2 seconds. And they'll move on with their lives and we'll never see each other again. And three, oh yeah, like I don't care. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's, I don't know. That is the funny part of like the human psychological packaging. But if you think about it enough, I use absurdity to break through that stuff because that's how I'm wired. Like I find stuff like that hilarious because you just zoom out a little bit and you see how silly it is,
Yeah. Well, we operate in our Google Street View, and then you pan out and you realize how, and it's exactly to your point, how minuscule, how minute, how irrelevant any of that stuff even is, right? And my daughter, like, she's 7 years old, but she'll try something new, and she's like, "Oh, I'm not good at it." I'm like, "Well, why would you be good at it? Like, why should you be good at it?
Yeah.
This is the first time you're doing this." And that goes for meditating, that goes for yoga, that goes for jujitsu, that goes for any practice that you want to take on or you want to instill. You're not going to be good at it at first. It takes time. It takes patience. And then when you can learn, and I think this is probably one of the most powerful parts of mindfulness or stillness, whatever avenue you want to go down, when you can learn to respond rather than react to things, and that space in between the trigger and what you decide to do with that information, that space right there, that's a superpower. And if you can hone in on that space and realize there is time in between there, and you could choose which route you want to go. It's very hard because we're programmed, and it's part of our human nature, but there is that space there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like we're all sort of programmed by nature to be as if we're staring at a road and we're just looking straight across it with blinders on. But as you develop as I was described it earlier, the floodlight awareness grows, so does the panorama of the length of the road. And then, so basically you're still in the same position of mind and experience, but now you can see the cars coming over the horizon as opposed to just being surprised by them appearing right in front of your eyes and disappearing. It's kind of the same process, you know? And then another good part of it is like, as that develops, then tuning into your kind of own sense of integrity. I think that's a big part of it too, because it's a kind of an important part of the recipe where as those things arise, you then, if you have the ability to choose, then we don't have to, but if you'd like, you can choose the kind and compassionate and thoughtful way to proceed, or you can choose the even more brutal and Machiavellian way to proceed, you know? So that integrity aspect, because some people, you know, there are people who are very nefarious people who I'm sure meditate all the time. I mean, have you ever seen the show Billions?
I haven't.
It was a show about a hedge fund trader that was essentially like a sociopathic billionaire, and he was a genius, but he would go into this part of his office and like meditate for 20 minutes and use that spaciousness of mind to basically play the chess games of how he could like ruin people's lives, you know? So it's important to also have the other aspect if that's what you're going for.
Yeah, finding that balance. Again, it gives you the opportunity to think at least clearly at the very least. In your book, you talk about two things that stood out to me amongst many, but two things that really stood out to me was that there's always an opportunity to practice mindfulness. We think that we need to be in a vacuum of existence, or we need to go and do ayahuasca, or be in a sensory deprivation tank, or, you know, we need, you know, to be, you know, sitting full lotus. But something as simple as brushing your teeth, or that first cup of coffee, which when I pour that first cup of coffee in the morning, I think of your book, and I think about it is the opportunity to practice just being present, the sounds, the taste, the warmth of the cup, the view of my backyard, whatever it is. And I think people get too caught up in it needing to be this perfect scenario where I can now meditate, or I can now practice this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that you pointed out that coffee cup example, because I've had so many people tell me the same thing. And I'm glad, because I tried to pick an example that most people drink coffee in the morning, and it's also the highlight of most people's mornings, because everyone loves the first cup of coffee, and it's a good thing that everyone looks forward to. So that was why I picked it, because it's inherently attractive and easy and positive.
It's the modern day of you know, putting your feet in the grass or staring up at the stars. Like, it's something that we all experience and connect. And for those of us who drink coffee, we truly appreciate that moment.
Absolutely. But yeah, no, I mean, that's another really mistranslation of mindfulness and meditation in Western culture, is that it all has to be compartmentalized. You know, that's one of the aspects of our cultural mind that is really strange. And we think it very much up. I mean, it seems this is kind of changing. I think the internet is helping this. Actually, it's helping, and it's making it worse. but we think we think in very Aristotelian logic. We think things are either A or B,
Right.
but that's just a part of our cultural design because we're told this is correct, this is incorrect. But of course, that precludes all of the nuance and the perceptual aspects of human nature. That's why, often in Asian culture, they see things not as A or B, but typically maybe A and B at the same time, or maybe it's a little bit of little A, a little B. There's a bit more nuance. It's interesting, even if you look at language, not to get too nerdy here, but this is folded right into the language of the different cultures, where in alphabetic language, a word, a series of words have a series of definitions. And if you put those series of words, there is, hypothetically one thing that it should mean, like correct writing. This
Right.
sentence means this. This word relates to this. But in ideogrammic language, there's symbols, right? Instead of letters. And the symbols have meaning, but inherently in the construction and the usage of the symbols, because they're symbols, it is predisposed to having interpretation there.
Right.
That's a pretty big difference between saying like this is truth and this is objectively true, and this is a statement that has wiggle room, right? Anyway, so getting back to the original point, because of all of that, we typically look at like right and wrong. We have to compartmentalize, like, well, this is when I do this thing. This is when I am this person. That's a big one that always fries in my brain.
Yeah. This is when I could be my authentic self, and this one I have to be this
Right.
version of me.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a real weird one. And so because of that, so they think that meditation, you meditate for whatever it is, 20 minutes, an hour, 5 minutes in the morning, and then you're done and you just move on with your day and you don't think about it again. But that's very confusing to people who study, wisdom traditions in the East, because like, well, why do you just have this switch that you turn on and then you turn it off? That doesn't really make any sense, right? So any moment, like every moment that you're aware, is a moment for meditation or mindfulness, and it doesn't have to be this process-driven, job. That's another issue, is that people often see it as like, oh, well, if I'm trying to be mindful all the time, that sounds exhausting because like I have to always be thinking about it and performing it. But there it goes again. You're always performing it and thinking about it and trying to apply this idea of mindfulness to your sense of identity and self, as opposed to just letting it all sort of naturally melt together and let it arise and fall and arise and fall throughout your day. So you certainly don't have to be taking some hardcore methodical Satipatthana Sutra mindfulness training practice all day, but in the moments where you remember, you can just, when it goes into your head, you go, oh, right, let me just tune into my senses right now. Let me step out of this pressurized momentum, this story that I have to be doing this and then that and then doing this. Let me just like be here with this experience for a moment, and then you'll forget about it and you'll get wrapped up and you'll get, there'll be a million notifications going off and you'll do all this stuff. And then maybe an hour later, whenever you're like making something for lunch, you'll remember again. You go, oh, right. Like, let me just actually shut off all the nonsense and just really focus and be here with this process while I'm making this sandwich. And then you later off in the day, maybe you're standing in line somewhere and you're like feeling stressed. You're looking at your phone, you're looking around, you're getting uncomfortable because, your back is hurting because you're standing there. And then you remember, oh, right, I can tune back into that right now, So it's just little moments of remembering, at first to just come back to it and come back to it and come back to it. And there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's just a matter of trying to do it. And then, as I talked about at the beginning of the podcast, watching and noticing how that changes your reactivity and your overall sea level of presence in your life, the more that you remember it. Because it's almost like as if it were a pixel or something. Every time you remember, you're adding like a pixel to the screen, another pixel, another pixel, another pixel. And then over a period of time, you'll then notice like bigger changes where, say, there's something that you're touchy or defensive or weird about, and someone brings it up and talks, and normally you would react and say something. Maybe you say it's sarcastic, or you shut off, or you change the subject or whatever. Then in that moment, you'd notice like, oh, that pressurized, tense reactivity feeling, like I'm not feeling, like I feel a little bit of it. It's 20%. And maybe now I can talk through this and deal with this situation as opposed to just reacting like I normally would.
You mentioned the making the sandwich thing, and it's funny you brought that up. As you were saying that, I was thinking of a particular time I was making oatmeal, and I remember opening the microwave door, and it was like boom, like it was so loud, and then the bowl hitting the glass plate in the microwave, and then the buttons beep beep, and it was so loud and it was so immersive. And it stands out to me. And a lot of those moments, they may sneak up on you. They may be an attempt at something pre-planned, like when I had my children. That was a very present moment. It was very, very present. And it really breaks the mold. It breaks the matrix. It's a Truman Show moment where you're like, you look around, you're like, is everyone else experiencing this? Like, what is going on in this moment? And it's, to your point, it's a pixel of this bigger picture. Do you think it's possible to live in that state constantly, or is it something that is always going to ebb and flow?
Most of the time it's going to ebb and flow. I would say that personally, I can't think of the last time I wasn't in that state. And it's just because I've been working on it for over 20 years at this point. But I think the best way to describe it is, and this is, again, this is like in the classical canonical writings about how this is actually supposed to work. This is how I experienced it anyway. It's described like this: if you're standing in the middle of a field and you're looking at a single tree in the distance in the middle of a field, and you have your eyes focused on that tree, your attention should be equally split between the tree and the actual landscape that the tree is resting on. And what happens is that is a balance of a focused, immersive type of mindful awareness and a spacious, broad, available mindful awareness. And over time in training, the mind learns how to rest really comfortably in between those two places. And maybe even more importantly, it learns to adapt very flexibly when necessary to either of those states. Because being a bipedal mammal, there are moments where, it's chaos, like life is chaos, right?
Right.
Nature is chaos. So we always need to react. We do need to react to things. We need to respond to things constantly. And so having the brain in this state of awareness, but it's not so, people think that sometimes that you're supposed to get so spaced out that you're almost sort of detached from the granular nature of reality. Well, that's not true. Other people think that you're supposed to get so focused that you're almost kind of deaf to the outside world to a degree, but that's not true either. Again, everyone's always trying to extreme and compartmentalize and switch on and off things. It's a blend of both of those things. And what's interesting is that I've spoken to a lot of the top neuroscientists in the world that are researching mindfulness in the laboratory, and all of them say the same thing, is that there's brain growth and brain change of people who have been practicing for more than 10 years that clearly show the strengthening of the part of the brain that facilitates that transitional point of awareness between a deep focus and a spatial type of focus, and also strengthens the ability to naturally and intuitively move between those. So I say all that to say that whenever you arrive at a place of steady mindful awareness, you can live in that space, but it's not that you're always zoomed in and you're typing on your keyboard and it's like every button
Right.
sounds like it's like an avalanche, and you're so
Right.
tuned in. And it's also not that every time you're walking down the street you're hearing every single insect all at once and you're identifying their positioning around you in a binaural. It's just having that malleable presence that always is there and moving back and forth naturally.
Yeah, because both of those obviously would be debilitating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like in the book anyway. Whenever I told the story about the existential paralysis, that was the issue.
Right.
It was like I'd gone so hardcore into both of those directions at once without there being a bridge between them, and I just got stuck there and felt like I was like having a mental breakdown.
Is that bridge between them flow, like a flow state?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because that seems to be when, and again, that could be, fight or flight, that could be anything, but when you kind of tap into that flow state, it is distantly immersive, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that's a good way to describe how I feel about a passenger of life that is distantly immersed.
You talk about obviously mental clarity and stillness, and those are results of mindfulness, correct?
Yeah, they can be.
Amongst a million other things.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like everyone is so different. I mean, like I would say that for me, they definitely are, and traditionally, they are byproducts of those things.
Well, I think that would be the ideal long-term goal for most people who are kind of embarking on this journey, would be an idea of finding that stillness that we're kind of talking about in regards to being immersive and obviously being aware of your surroundings, but then also having the mental clarity in those moments or to those moments that once you arrive, you're aware that you're there and staying there. You're just frozen. Did I lose you? You froze, and then I wasn't sure if you were just being very mindful and still. And I was like, wait a minute, he's not responding at all.
Yeah, that's what happened on my end too. I actually heard your voice for a while after the camera froze, but don't know. Has that ever happened to you before?
I'm in my pod shed, so and I have hardwired internet, but it's always just an X factor out here.
Interesting. Yeah, I have Google Fiber as well. Yeah. I usually have pretty solid, Do you have Google Fiber, or do you have fiber, or what do you have?
No, just regular internet. I don't know, Verizon, Fios.
Right on. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the fiber because
what is the fiber?
Google Fiber, like it's in select cities, and Austin happens to be one of them. And basically, you get 1,000 megabytes per minute, I guess.
Okay. I don't know what any of that means.
Yeah. Well, normally, so you can do little speed tests, right? And so if you were to use your phone, it would probably say 55 megabytes per minute of your download speed.
Right.
A normal, a pretty good internet connection would be 200. We're yeah, I'm cooking now.
Okay.
But Google Fiber is just off the charts, ridiculous. So it's 1,000. So it's basically 4 times the speed of you can upload a gigabyte in less than a minute.
So you're flying. You're flying.
I'm flying. Yeah. I like it because of audio uploads, man, because if you're uploading even things for a podcast, it's I just want it done instantly.
I know. It's it could be you're just watching that bar fill.
Yeah.
Slowly.
No, I'm not. Never again. I did so much, I started off as an audio producer,
Yeah.
And so the amount of gigabytes involved, in the world before fiber internet, I was I paid my dues for 10 years of okay, I'm going to upload this file tonight and I'm going to go to bed and I'll wake up so it'll be done tomorrow.
It was when you got a really good song on Napster.
Oh yeah.
And you just
Yeah,
like,
man.
all right, well, I'm just gonna go to bed until Nirvana covering Enter Sandman Philly loads, and then you get it, and
Totally.
it's Wesley Willis. It's not even
um, did they cover Enter Sandman, or you
no,
just make that up?
it was Wesley Willis.
Oh, okay. Say, damn, that'd be pretty sweet.
I know. That's why I was trying to download it. I was trying to download it in 1999 or whatever Napster's at in high school. I was like, all right, I'm gonna get this song, and then all of a sudden it's Wesley Willis singing about sucking a honey badger's dick or something. So
Also a worthwhile pursuit.
yes, for sure. How's Austin?
It's really hot right now.
Yeah.
It's been 100, at least 100 degrees, but it was 108 yesterday. And let's see, 105 the day before that. It's just been brutal. I mean, like everything is, I mean, this type of year, the time of year in Texas, it's always just like the grass is crunchy, everything's dead. But this summer, it's been particularly bad, which is really unfortunate, given that ever since the snowpocalypse from 2 years ago happened and the power grid went down and everyone was without powers for a week, power for a week. Everyone lost their superpowers. So it was brutal.
There's just kryptonite everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, now everyone has anxiety, and now the electronic grid, ERCOT, is like, they'll put out a thing like yesterday, they were like, everyone, don't use any appliances from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. unless you want the power for the whole city to go down. So people are freaked out. People with kids and dogs and stuff at home. I mean, that's elderly people. I mean, it's brutal, man.
Yeah, you don't want to be the guy that just like turns on your air conditioning. It's like,
yeah, you see downtown, just everything shuts off. Like, whoops, because I should have open the window.
I'm in Westchester, New York. We get those fairly often. They're like, all right, Con Ed alert, don't do anything. You're like, oh shit,
Yeah.
Just overload, sensory overload.
Is that for the cold, I guess?
No, for the heat specifically.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like don't turn on too many air conditioning in your house. I'm like, oh boy, all right.
Yeah.
Let's unplug the fridge.
Yeah.
Austin's great. I went down there a few years ago, and it's definitely it's just there's a morphic resonance to Austin that's just not replaceable.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm a little like nose blind to it in a way, where I just grew up here, and so it's not until I go other places that I'm like, this seems a little like cookie cutter. It feels just kind of, there's a lot of red brick and people and like business casual.
Right.
And there's nothing,
It's a lot of khakis in this town.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I have a weird feeling, because like I like Austin a lot, which is why I haven't left. But at the same time, I don't want to live in the same city my entire life,
Yeah.
So I am always thinking about moving overseas, which I'm sure will happen at some point.
Yeah, Austin is and it's growing like crazy, right? Like wildfire. Do you see that on like the day-to-day?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can't, it's getting to where since COVID, on lockdown, since everything was unlocked, basically, it's just, everything has a line. Everything is, you book restaurants out like weeks or months in advance. Every type of like event is immediately sold out. It's just a lot of people. It's just kind of like trying to do something in Los Angeles pretty much now,
It's it must be weird to have been there prior. My wife's cousin lives there and has lived there for years now, and prior to COVID and everything. And he would say that, it's the logos keep Austin weird, right? But it's kind of becoming less and less of that, the authenticity aspect of it. But again, to that earlier point, there is like an energy to the air there that's very unique from everywhere I've been. I haven't been very far, but from everywhere that I've been, there is something about Austin that kind of just stands out as just this pocket, this little pocket of awesomeness.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a interesting like vibe of creativity here. And there's sort of like one of the just, I mean, whether I like it or not, I am a Texan, because, I was born here. I'm from here. But a part of the like just ridiculousness of Texans is that there is this kind of wildness of like, people are like, oh yeah, you do whatever you want and just be, I don't know, kind of reckless. And it's a little bit of like arrogance and entitlement in a weird way, but also just like a lot of like not giving a fuck, so if you take some of that energy and then take like all of the conservative outer area of Texas, and you have this tiny little like pocket of what is a more liberal, or really now becoming, I guess, a more like centrist sort of city, it just gets like crushed into this diamond of like creativity and attempts at forward thinking, because the rest of the state is like crushing into this. But then you get that energy of like kind of the crazy Texas stuff happening along with it. So you get a lot of interesting things and vibes going on.
Yeah, it is like, because you look around Texas and you're like, okay, Austin does not fit into the traditional idea of what Texas is.
Right.
And that's why I guess it's so special. But because it's so surrounded by all of what Texas is in a stereotypical way, I guess that also has this kind of impact to the, I don't want to say purity, but there is something to that there's still these good old fashioned roots and this good old fashioned feeling to it, Americana, if you will, but it still has this, like you said, forward thinking, this progressive mindset kind of leading everything.
Yeah, it's like I call it the no coast. It's like, because
right.
You can call like the West Coast, well, it's sort of like trapped, right? Like, so California is trapped on, and so half of it has no influence from anywhere else because there's just an ocean. So I guess the ocean is its influence, right? So it's it's like over there, like New York and the Upper East Coast, as you know very well, same thing. Like, it's landlocked in its own area, and it's got its own energy. And Austin is the same, but like it's a coast, but it's landlocked in a coast. Like, like Texas is the surrounding coast, and Austin is like the area where its boundary is. So it's got a weird thing like that.
The influence from its outside fortress, right?
Yeah,
outside the walls.
Totally. What's weird, and I mean, we have to talk about Texas
No.
What's interesting is that a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing anyway is that Houston is actually becoming more of a diverse town than Austin, which wasn't always the case. I mean, Austin isn't super diverse culturally, which is one thing I wish would change. But that's even becoming more so now, because so many people from California and some of the East Coast as well, and Colorado are moving here. So it's one thing that I wish that wasn't changing about Austin in the way that it was.
So you wish there was more diversity?
Yes. No.
Less diversity in Austin.
I told you I was from Texas. Yeah. No. More diversity. I wish it was more diverse. And also I really wish that, like, it's a strange thing because there's so many people here now, but we have like the traffic and the tension of a larger city because of the amount of people, but without the great things like the old money, like a place like New York or Chicago or something. There's like old money that makes things like, you have a museum that is like world class, or like 3 museums. You have a zoo that isn't just a little pit of suffering. You have some like arts programs. You have like New York, there's Broadway, there's MoMA, there's the Guggenheim, there's the Whitney, there's all this stuff. You have these different things like that, but that's just not here. And I really wish it were. I mean, like, the museums are better in Houston than they are in Austin, so it'd be nice to kind of graduate up to a real big city as opposed to being in this weird limbo.
Yeah, but you also don't want that either, because then you're really just then you've lost it. I think, you now you're just another big city, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's what makes it special. I mean, I'm not a big Manhattan guy. I never want to go in. I'm not a big go into the city guy. And it's just because there's just like, and I live outside the city by time, maybe 20 minutes, a half hour, but obviously with traffic, it's way more than that. But
Yeah.
you feel that tension seep out, right? Like people going to the train in the morning, going into the city. If I'm driving my kids to school, whatever it is, that energy just, seeps out of that nucleus of the city, and it's just tense, and it's
Yeah.
just hot, and it's just loud. And I'm like, I am not a city person. I'm on the suburbs, and even this is getting a little bit crowded and just congested and angry, and it's just no, not my
You know what's weird about that is that, one, I think that for as far as Austin goes, we're already have enough of the stuff that we have given up. So there's enough of the kind of the negative qualities of a large city that it would be worth going ahead and having some of those bigger things I was talking about. Like, we're already too far gone and we don't have it. So let's have it and just, compromise. But what's really interesting is that tension you're talking about is something that I am very fascinated by, that urban anxiety, that tension. And that is really, that's pretty much an American thing. Which, have you traveled internationally much?
No, I'm not a world traveler.
It's one of the strange things that you notice whenever you go anywhere else. There's a lot of people, and even if there's a lot of like people in the subway or something, or just on the city on the street, there'll be movement. There's bustling, but it's just, there's energy. There's calmness. There's not that tension and that aggression. It's a peculiarly American thing.
Why do you think that it is? Is that just the mindset of, the hustle, the bustle, the grind, the get at it, go to work, get up, grind, hustle, big cities? Is that just the American way? Or are we just kind of do we have to succumb to this mindset and this energy? Do I have to move to the Netherlands? Is that what you're telling me?
I would recommend it if you could, but
yeah.
No, it's a combination of a lot of things. I think that one of the things that makes America awesome is that there's this total hallucination of the fact that you can do anything. We are the best. We're the awesomest. We make all the culture. We make all the cool things. We're the greatest. And a lot of people, generations, grew up saying, hey, we're number one. We're the best. And like, you can do anything you want, right? So that has created a lot of really amazing things, because in times where something seemed impossible, you get some nutcase that it's like, I was talking to Chris Ryan about this the other day, where it's like, you wouldn't get Jimi Hendrix,
right?
Otherwise, because you have some guy that's like, I can do whatever I want. And there's all this weird abundance and like, I'm just going to go crazy, but like, what that does is that creates also a very self-centered, individualistic mindset. So you think everything is mine for the taking. And I also, because things have been relatively easy and because there's so much abundance here, I deserve all these things, because we're also told we deserve them. So people feel kind of entitled to luxury. They feel entitled to success. They feel entitled to abundance. And then they're told that they should always, that basically their value comes from getting more and focusing on valuing the material. So people get in this craving mindset, and they're taught to look at other people as it's like a zero-sum game where, like, for example, you and I are both podcasters. I want your podcast to be the most successful podcast in the world, because I would love for it to be great, and I would love for you to do great. It doesn't take anything away from me if you do great, right? Because there's a lot of people out there that listen to podcasts. It's totally fine. It's plenty to go around. But we're taught to think that like we should be in competition with each other. Like, no, I need to be better than that guy. And if he's doing better than me, then I don't like him anymore. And I'm going to feel like I'm failing. That's really ingrained into our mindset. I think that's changing a little bit. But what that does is that makes it to where people are looking at other people as competition. They're irritated because of the sense of entitlement that they should have a certain life and they feel like it's owed to them. And then they're, frustrated and edgy because they don't, they see everyone else as obstacles. And I think that created this cultural hive mind of frustration and hostility and looking at other people as like irritants as opposed to other people, because it's such a self-centered type of focus. And if you like, for example, like some of my friends that are musicians that are from London, for example, they're like, they do well. And the problem there is like one of them wins a Mercury Prize or something, which is like a Grammy essentially in England. And then their friends are like, it's the opposite. It's not like it's basically people are like, oh, that's cool. Like it's sort of
in a dickish way, or
no, just in sort of a like, well, like, yeah, you should have kind of kept your head down and just sort of like, kept on going, but you did something like exemplary and like, all right, good on you, but keep it moving. Don't get too, full of yourself. Yeah. Or else we'll bring you down, and everyone just keep it moving and keep your head down and just be cool. And so that in itself, that's a problem too, but it doesn't create the same type of irritation and frustration. It just creates a quiet, sort of dull feeling inside inside, but this
just like you're dead inside. That's all.
Yeah,
no
that's all. But this is what we have the demon inside of us of, anger. One of the trippiest things, like I noticed that, the first time that I ever went to Europe, and I came back and I was like, whoa, people are so one. There's like this weird entitlement and people are so much more edgy and uptight here. But it really blew me away whenever I went to Japan, because one of the train stations there, the Shinjuku train station is one of the busiest train stations, if not the busiest in the world. And like, I can't remember how many million people pass through it every day. It's just an insane amount of people. And also I'm tall, so I'm 6'2", and
so you really stand out there.
Very much, yeah, very, very much stand out. And I remember when I got from the airport train to like the main train station, and there was just like a billion people walking through there. It's literally like, it's so full that it's like you're at a concert, like in the front row of like a big concert, but that's just the whole thing. And you're just pressed up against everyone. Like I was on a train and like, whenever it's so full that whenever it takes off, everyone kind of goes back a few degrees because of the momentum, but then it's hard to correct once like the momentum picks. So everyone's sort of like leaning, and the more stops you have, the more off balance and weird it gets. And so I, at one point, had a leg like 2 foot in front of me because I was so leaned over from getting caught up in the momentum, and there's so many bodies that you're all holding each other up, and some young woman just sat on my knee like a chair, but I couldn't get to her because there was so many like heads and shoulders in between us, where I was like, well, I guess I'm furniture now. Like it's that there's
accept the role.
Yeah, that many people. And so, but walking around like that, there was that many people, but it was totally relaxed. Like
that's weird.
Yeah, I know.
That's so weird, because you would think it's like, again, and that's like the stereotypical, again, I imagine when you see that Japanese train station in movies or whatever it is, culture, that's the one they're kind of zeroing in on. I'm sure it's definitely just the massive hustle, the doors close off, and it's just like cutting off culture. It's like, bam, that's it. Everyone in, everyone out. But you would think that there would be this tension or this, you know what I mean? You could be in an empty subway with 5 people and you feel that energy in Manhattan.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe it's even worse with just 5 people.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's weird. And like, what's funny is that you and I are talking about it as if that's strange, right? But what's actually strange is the fact that we have this inherent aggression in our culture. I mean, we don't have to go way off the rails here, but I mean, look at the violence, of the last, the public violence. I mean, of course, all that said, the ex-president of Japan, or prime minister of Japan, was assassinated a few days ago.
Right.
But, but poor, that's so insane. I mean,
Right.
but anyway, yeah, it's a peculiar one, but hopefully, man, hopefully we'll work it out here, and people will start learning how to calm down and really appreciate, some of the things that we have available to us that other places don't.
I doubt it, unfortunately.
I doubt it too, man. I don't have any hope for it. I think that the best thing you can do is there's so many people, and the internet has made people so trapped in their own personal bias that it can be very difficult to find as a collective enough common ground. And what you can do is live by example and take care of your community. I think that's where it's at, in a world that is getting weirder and more complicated by the day. Just focus on yourself and the people around you, and do right by everyone, and do the best you can with the people that are within arm's reach. And if the more people do that, the larger patches of peace and sanity that and just reason, and acceptance that we'll have, I think.
Yeah, I think I don't think it'll ever change, sadly. And I think it's just really the silent minority. I think the majority of people, the majority of people agree on things. The majority of people are kind of lock in step with each other. There's obviously some things that we're all not going to agree on everything, but I think for the most part, people, if you asked 9 out of 10 people, like, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. It's logical. It's common sense at the very least. But it's that loud minority that's just screaming out into the world, and everyone's just in a state of panic and fear, and you don't know where to look and where to go. And it goes to your earlier point of, the modern world has created this tension, and it's actually a quote I have it written down for your book, that the modern world has left everyone feeling like they aren't enough. And I always think of the quote, and it's probably one of, if not my favorite, is "Comparison is the thief of joy" by Teddy Roosevelt. And we have a culture now that perpetuates that. It thrives on dividing. It thrives on anger and tension, and it is this boiling stew of just heat and bubble and lava. It's like it's this darkness that's kind of underlying within all of us, and you can kind of feel it, right? And unless you break free of that on your own accord and realize it's not going to be a president, it's not going to be a god, it's not going to be a deity, it's not going to be a hero, it's you that has to save yourself. And then from there, to your point, you're able to, affect your town or your community or even just your children. And that, hopefully, if enough people do that, that's how we have bigger change and a more harmonious world, and at least country.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
It's crazy. It's crazy. You made a point in the book, confronting what makes you feel negative is how you can create positive change. How much of mindfulness, and it kind of relates this in regards to sitting with yourself and interfacing with yourself in this really raw, unfiltered way? Because there are going to be, I remember when I first signed up to go into a sensory deprivation tank, and my first thought was, well, I'm afraid what I'm going to think in there. And my second thought was, well, that's scarier than anything I'll think in there, because those thoughts are happening, whether I'm aware of them or not. So it's best I interface with them and at least have a new relationship with them, rather than just keep me out of my own mind and just keep them kind of passively in my subconscious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like the idea of flipping the script on the mindset of negative thoughts, where if you think you become worried that you're going to be haunted by a negative thought, it's like, no. Turn it around. You hold that negative thought captive and tape it to a chair and put a hot light on its face. Don't be the victim.
Cut its ear off like in Reservoir Dogs.
Exactly, man. Yeah. But it's good to, obviously I should be clear, people who have traumas that, you don't necessarily want to go into unpacking those things by yourself and perhaps with a qualified therapist would be a place to examine traumas like that, because that can be somewhat dangerous. But with the general, negative stuff of mind that everyone deals with, yeah, it's great to put eyes on it and put shape to it, and try and understand it a little bit more. And I think in most cases, whenever you begin to get perspective on those things, they lose their power.
And that could, seep its way into, and it does seep its way into culture. It seeps its way into kind of our earlier point of, if you're able to be, in that busy, tense subway, if you're able to just be who you are, what you are, and stand firmly in your own harmonious, energetic vibe, that starts to seep its way into other people. People pick up on that. People realize that there is a dial that we could dial into and fine tune, and we feel that energetic exchange. Like there's an awareness intrinsically within us when someone enters a room and there's a negative vibe or there's a positive vibe, right? We have an antenna for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And if you can focus on calming yourself and undoing the stuff that makes you feel edgy and ungrounded, then you can be a source of that sensation of acceptance and openness and calmness for other people, which is a really beautiful way to just kind of be of service.
What's something that gets you up in a tiff?
Well, first off, or lateness, I guess. I do have to roll in just a minute to
go
to another meeting. But what irritates me, let's see. I think things that like pet peeves of mine would be whenever there's a lot of people in public and they are not being like considerate of one another, and they're just sort of being really either unaware or self-absorbed in situations like that, where it's making life harder for everyone else. That always is, that's definitely irritating. But nothing gets me, like, I don't get mad or like frustrated or anything like that. It's just one of the things that I observe, and I'm like, come on, man, get it together, like pay attention.
Have a little self-awareness. Pick
exactly.
up, read the room a little bit. You're a humanitarian through and through, I must say.
Yes, absolutely.
Cory Allen, thank you so much. Where can people connect with you? Where can people get your book? Where can people get the podcast?
Yeah, if they go to my website, coryallen.com, all the stuff's there. I also have a new meditation course called Coming Home. My book, you can check it out on Amazon. It's been on sale. The hardcover has been on sale for like 50% off. I don't know how Amazon calculates those discounts, but they always have it going back and forth. And then all of my social handles are Hey Cory Allen.
Awesome. Cory, I appreciate your time, man. I really do. Again, your book is one of my favorites. And I read it at a time where I was just at that brink. I was like, oh, okay. So it was a connection of mindfulness and bringing it into practical, applicable practice. So I appreciate you writing. I appreciate you showing up the way you do, and keep it up, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. That means a lot to me. I'm really glad it was helpful for you.